Good. Okay, I'm sorry for playing with my telephone. You know that in a little while I'm going to encourage us to turn them off. But I was checking out this display here. I got a couple of sick ladies at home, but they have Zoom. So I sent a message and I said, tell me if you can see both me and the screen. Because I noticed on one of the recent occasions, we could see the screen, but not the person, or sometimes, is that what it was? Yeah. So I'd like this to be done as well as we can do it. So I've had it checked out. I will not look at my phone again except to put it away through class. Before we get started big time, Mickey, thanks a lot for what you did last week. It was very well done. I heard compliments and even made some of my own about it, so thank you. And yeah, we'll wait till announcements on most of the rest of it. I'm going to ask Connor, I already have, but I'm going to ask him publicly now to lead us in a prayer before we start. You remember a couple of weeks ago, yeah, I told Terry I had a question for her later. And you never heard that question. But she came along not too long afterward and said, you had a special question for me. And I said, yes, I do. You know, she used to be a middle school teacher. Middle school teachers, among the things they do, is they assign book reports. Am I hearing a uh-oh yet? Who would want to take on doing a book report, no more than 3 pages, on Revelation? Chuckle, chuckle, chuckle. You can volunteer in private later if you like, but... I think book reports usually call for the writer's inputs on things. So, you can talk with me later. I would like to see one, at least, one. Would there be a reason for that? Except that, well, he's kind of off anyway, but would there be a reason for my asking for that? Would you care to share what it is?
We'll boil it down to one thing.
I have said several times, get the flow of this book. And it's going to be on a slide again this morning. Get the flow of this book. If you can do that, I think you can get a lot of the most important things. So, if somebody wants to come along and volunteer, no. When one of you decides, yes, I will, let me know. Just 3 pages or less. We don't need Crime and Punishment or War and Peace or the Brothers Karamazov or any of that. We just need a short one. Rob.
We could do better than that. We could do that in 2 words.
I know. I guess I'm going to have to send out the rules that Terry sent me regarding a book report. There is more to it than God wins. We know that one. We know several of the others. But let's somebody step up and say, I can do that, as you can. So for now, we're going to begin with chapter 14. Not going to cover all of it because Mickey did some of it last week. So I'm going to hit what I think are some of the high points that we do need to cover. You know, this has been a very abbreviated course from the beginning, so stay tuned for more of the same. chapter 14 opens with the scene at Mount Zion where there is the Lamb and the 144,000. Yeah, want to be sure I had that number right. What's the significance of Mount Zion? I'm sorry. I thought I heard somebody say.
The baby spoke.
Oh,
According to the song, it's
out of the mouths of babes. All right, I talked over him. He said, according to,
the song. It's the city of God.
okay, what else? Jerusalem. Anything else? Anything special it's known for? Perry? No, not quite. Okay, Barry?
In Isaiah 2, the writer identifies that as the place where the word goes out and judgment of the Lord.
Okay, so what might be coming from there? Judgment, according to not always the law, which Perry was referring to, the Ten Commandments, but things that God said, some statements of authority of what he expected. So, that's where they are. And most of this you've covered already. It's a place of refuge, according to Psalm 48. It was a sign of victory. It is a sign of victory in this place, in this passage today. These people, those early Christians who stuck with what Jesus had said, celebrated a victory. And it is figuratively, remember, this book was written before all the things that it concerned, most of the things that it concerned happened. So there is a lot of figurative language here. A lot of the visions that we see him writing down are figurative. And we'll look at some specifically this morning that have to do with things that are yet to come for them. Chapter 1 says what about when were these things going to come to pass? Soon, at hand. Chapter 22 says what about those things that were written, that were recorded there? When were they going to come to pass? So the book ended. The beginning and the end of the book say the same thing. These things must shortly come to pass. So just a peek ahead about what we'll cover here probably 2 weeks from now, what we'll start covering for a brief time. So anything written in that book, if it's meant to refer to the year, go ahead, Alex, you can say it. Refer to the year.
25.
Thank you. If it's meant to refer to that, what did it do for those first readers? What would it mean to them? Nothing, she said. Nothing. Okay. We've talked before about who the 144,000 were. They were God's faithful people at the time. Were there only 144,000? No. Are there only 144,000 faithful people to God now? I sure hope not. No. Contrast what they have on their foreheads. You remember, I think it was chapter 7 when the Christians were sealed. Was that 7 or 6? In all the excitement, I've lost track myself. But that's a line from a Clint Eastwood movie. I like him. Okay. God's faithful have the seal of God on their foreheads. You remember when that happened. Contrast that with the mark of the beast that you saw. I think, oh, you got down to that, you said, right, Mickey? Okay, briefly, because we've hinted at it a few times. What was this mark of the beast? Okay. There is that. And was there a physical mark that these Roman citizens had? Can't prove it, but there was some way of distinguishing who was able to purchase and who was worshiping the emperor, and it was clear that Christians did not. So, as we move on. Oh, another thing here. Notice down here, there is another song. Remember once before we saw a song, and then in the following chapter, that song was revised some? What chapters am I talking about? And what was it? 4 and 5. In 4, they sang a song praising God, him who sat on the throne, clearly God. In chapter 5, who did they now have included in the song? Jesus the Lamb, okay? So there's a little bit of review thrown in here. All right. Going to look at, early in this chapter, there are some proclamations, things said coming from heaven. Among them, probably first, preach the everlasting gospel. Got to do that. You might remember a chapter or so back, what was one of the reasons that those early Christians prevailed, that they kept their faith? I'll give you one. One of them was that they valued not their lives more than Christianity. They were willing to die. But there's another one in there. What else was in there? The blood of the Lamb. And let's get to that other one. The word of their testimony. What does that mean to you? That one of the reasons they were faithful, they could remain faithful, was because of the word of their testimony. Well, then I'll tell you what it means to me. It means, you missed the plug I gave for you in the book report stuff. Well, you can help me grade them. They taught the word. They were not embarrassed to speak up about Christ. The word of their testimony, they spoke. Do I feel uh-oh here? You know, we're very reluctant, and I understand the 3 things you don't talk about at work and so on and so on. You just don't do that. And religion is among them. But what does God expect us to do? And right up here in these messages from heaven, preach that everlasting gospel. Why? Yeah, so Satan won't have it. Romans 1:16. What do we have there? Are we really not ashamed of the gospel? Just a self-reflection question here. Okay. Another one was, Babylon is fallen. Oh. But had it happened yet? Isn't this book telling what's about to happen? But here it says Babylon is fallen. Babylon being Rome. What's that tell you about whoever is behind, and we know who is behind this verse, this instruction.
More like a proclamation that God said, when he says it, it's going to happen.
Exactly. So definite is it, he is saying, they're toast. It's all done for them. Would that give you some confidence if you were one of the early readers or having this read to you? Oh, the worshipers of the beast are going to be tormented, is in there. And well deserved, right? And if you're one of those early readers, people who have been tormented, persecuted by the emperor worshiping people, isn't this a breath of fresh air? Their time is coming. But blessed are the dead in Christ. Not every Christian was going to live through everything that was going to be happening. Remember the fifth seal, what was the question? How long? And the answer was, first, the immediate answer was, not yet, but because there are some more that are going to have to suffer. So, all right. There was a discussion in the latter part of the chapter about a harvest. There are two harvests occurring here. One of them is being done by Jesus. And I put some other passages up there you might want to look at, but consensus, and I think it's accurate, is that this harvest is of the grain, seed, people in this case. But it's, the references here will point you back to grain being taken. The second one is not so pleasant. It's about these grapes being taken and then cast into what the Bible refers to as the winepress of God's wrath. Just stomped out. Worn out. Which passage do I? Somebody turn to Joel 3:13. Okay, which somebody has it? Okay, Gary, thanks.
Put ye in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Come, tread ye, for the winepress is full. The vats overflow, for their wickedness is great.
See the difference? All right, we got through chapter 14. Didn't hit every little thing, but we're moving to chapters 15 and 16. 15, I think we can see. Oh, here's my reminder. Get the flow of the book. Note the contrast in things. We'll recall, here's a little more review. Letters taught, seals revealed, trumpets warned, and the bowls that are shortly to come into the reading here, those execute. And they're executing God's wrath on those oppressors. Sadly, and we're going to see it after, even after the bowls, we're going to see they would not all repent. All right, yeah, there it is. Chapter 7. Remember, there was the sealing of God's people before something else was going to happen. And then the trumpets were sounded in chapters 8 and 9. So here we are again with kind of a similar circumstance where there was the sealing before the trumpets. Now we're going to see God's people already standing victorious. We saw that last chapter. But in this chapter, they're going to be depicted as standing on the sea of glass. But the bowls of wrath are going to come against those who are oppressing them. A lot of contrast. God's people are safe here. Those sinners got a lot of trouble. And then one of the four living creatures gives angels 7 bowls of wrath. It's 1 bowl each. You know, sometimes people actually get into, was it 7 of them getting 7, make 49, or when you go through the rest of it, it only talks about 7 bowls being opened. Each angel got 1. And that's telling everybody the time for repentance is done. God has given opportunity after opportunity after opportunity. We could probably go one more. But his wrath is about to be released. The bowls are poured out against the enemy. You recall that first time a percentage was given or a fraction was given, it was 1/4, power to harm 1/4. And then the next time it was 1/3. It's an increasing amount of destruction that is going to be allowed, that is going to occur. The rule was, though, no harm to God's people. First bowl, grievous sores. Did we see something like this before? Okay, somebody turn a yes into what did we see before that's ringing through here as well? The fight with Pharaoh? The plagues. Yeah. But in the text of Revelation, what do we see? Yeah, we saw that. Sure did. Okay, the red horse brought on a lot of blood. I think there's another place, but I'll check it and we'll follow up on it after a while or later. Second bowl, the seas. This ought to start ringing familiar here. Did we see the seas affected already in this book? Or being told they would be affected? Yeah. And the things that did interfered with commerce, with naval operations, and so on. Imagine the seas. Figuratively, yes, but get the impact of it. The seas were all blood. Never mind. Then fresh water. So the drinking water is no good. You're not going to go fishing in this, so on. The fourth bowl, scorching by the sun. You know, previously in one of these rounds of 7, the celestial bodies were darkened for a certain time. Now what are we seeing? We're seeing the sun scorching people. But this is likely referring to the leadership there, the rulers who were so corrupt. The fifth bowl, fifth bowl, the fifth of these things has caught attention from time to time. But here we are directly, this angel who had the fifth bowl poured it out on the throne, figuratively, on the throne of the empire, the emperor. So now we have the upper level of leadership, of rule, just being done with. The kingdom becomes, I believe it says, it'll be a kingdom of darkness. Just a time when, darkness usually often refers to a loss of knowledge and wisdom and instruction. So they're losing all that. Okay. Sixth bowl, that angel chose or was directed to pour it out on the Euphrates. The importance of the Euphrates was it allowed, with it being dried up, it allowed invading armies from the east to get to Rome. So you recall one of the 3 things that historians attribute for the downfall of Rome, one of them was invasion by outside countries. So this is telling about, God's going to work this to where invading armies can come in. And as has happened with some of these cycles before, there is a pause again. Remember the sixth trumpet, there was a pause. So here we are with one, and I'm asking you to get the flow. See that all these things that have been done in cycles, seals, trumpets, and now the bowls, there's a rhythm to them. There's a certain flow. Anyway, now we have 3 unclean spirits. And as I read this text, all I could think of was frogs being recruiters. Those of us who have been or are in the military remember some experiences with recruiters and promises made and all this. Right, Gary? Yeah. Things said. Anyway, these, like frogs, they were what? What were they actually? 4th line down up there. Unclean spirits, like frogs, are recruiting armies to go and war against God. And that's not too bright. And they were going to do this at Megiddo, and we'll talk about Megiddo more at chapter 19. Oh yeah, got that up there, so we'll move on. After all that, so imagine being recruited and led by, dare I say, Kermit the Frog. Yeah. Except these were very wicked, unclean spirits. Anyway, 7th bowl is poured into the air, thunderings, lightnings, earthquakes, hailstones, and not just regular hailstones. Cars get beaten up with the little, golf ball sized one. What's the text say about these hailstones?
Weighed about 100 pounds.
About 100 pounds. Ugh. The body shops would not be able to keep up. Anyway, the message is, it's over. You have been destroyed. That's going to be hard to read, probably. It's just a little table I put together last evening about the sequencing and the comparisons of these. If you want it, I'll send it out this afternoon. Okay, I'll send it out. There'll be people get it who say, what? All right, I think that's the end of my slides. Where'd that take us? Through what chapters? 15? 16, that's what I hoped. Okay, so what's in chapter 17? I did not do slides for this one. As I told Mickey this morning, I'd kind of like to get through 18 if I can, but what's chapter 17 about? Somebody who has looked ahead, even if you just read that little title thing above the text itself.
The doom of Babylon.
Yes, that's what mine says too. All right. There's a lot in here about numbers of rulers and so on, and crowns and all that sort of thing, and they put numbers. There are 10 of this and 7 of this and so on. For this class, I'm not going to get into it at length. There will be a couple of times we'll pause and say, this is a likely thing. But who else is introduced in this 17th chapter? The great harlot, prostitute, whatever other names somebody might want to call her. How is she described? Start with her clothes. Purple and, yeah. How do we do this gracefully? I really don't want to use the word expect, because that kind of indicates, well, maybe it would be appropriate. For a woman in that line of work, do the clothes have to have some influence on those who see her? Most likely. You know, it's difficult to see very many TV shows without somewhere along the line there's going to be a solicitation scene, and the prostitute who is doing the soliciting is certainly not dressed in a big, roomy sweatsuit. Okay? She's going to have things that will conform more to the body and draw attention to certain parts of the body and so on. Is this woman pretty well described that way? And in those occasions, you know, where there is a successful transaction made, there is a leading away, you know, come to my place of business or whatever it is. But put it in terms of what's going on. What was Rome doing? Why would God refer to her as the great harlot? Because she is the one who's being described here. This is the city of Rome, the empire, being discussed in very unflattering terms. So what was she doing? What's the comparison being made here?
Verse 6 in chapter 17
Okay.
says, "And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the martyrs."
Yep.
So they were not being treated.
Okay, they were not. What else was she doing? Deceiving whom? Citizens of Rome. And when we get just a little bit further in the book and we realize that, and probably could have seen it just back a little bit, but it's going to be stated more definitely in the coming chapters. When the seas were affected, commerce was affected, this impact that Rome had, as those things were taken away or destroyed, it talks about the other nations began to weep at her downfall. Why? What were they getting from Rome that is going to be taken away? Profit. Yeah. It was a big city of commerce. Rome had expanded its influence to all these other countries and so on. They were dependent on her. Now we have those things dying away. They're losing that supply house they had. They're losing a lot of other, education for what it was worth. They're losing a lot of that. So this great harlot is the one who is out there influencing all these other countries, nations, whatever the right word is, come under us. Yes, sir.
I understand, appreciate the size of it's hard to overlook. It really is hard to overlook comparison and similarity between Rome and its democratic / republic type, style of life and how they govern and influence the world and give its title to her. Though I know that's not what, and I know that, and I'm not one of those people that think, oh, we're living through it. I think history repeats itself over and over for a reason. It's proven to us, truthfully, that yes, there is another nation that doesn't have kings. We don't.
Yep.
But we run nations that do. I mean, there are very many similarities.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And the things that we see daily in our experience into the scriptures that we see here today. Overtly
Can't argue with a bit of that. The only thing, like you said, this book, I'm convinced, is referring to Rome. But does that mean that people aren't going to be people and rulers aren't going to be rulers and so on, and different motives are going to come into play and different interests and priorities? Yeah. Rome was not the last of those empires, whatever we want to call them, to exert. We have a history professor here. Would you care to say anything about that?
Well, it's true, people see history as something of a cycle, but I think we need to remember that God has a plan that we have laid out in the text. History's going somewhere. It's linear.
Yep.
And the reason why I see it cyclical is because the sense that you just gave, people's character really will change. You tend to have people do the same great things in different ways, and the same heinous things in different ways.
Yep.
So it appears to go cyclical. But in essence, that's just the nature of people. The nature of God doesn't change either.
True.
The nature of God is truth and love, and that's what we count on. But history's linear. So, yeah, this refers to Rome.
Yeah.
No doubt about that in my mind, as you see it.
Yeah.
I think the text lays that out.
Yeah.
But it's impossible not to see some similarities
Oh, yeah.
because of the nature of people.
I think that's my point. That is my point.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that there is no tie to this being with Rome.
Right.
I think there's no different than the lessons that God was teaching to the Jews in the Old Testament. They're still tied to us today. I think, again, the consistency of it shows the consistency of God. That His truth can be seen throughout the Scripture. And the prophecies will land every time. I mean, even you think about David's seed, and David being a man after God's own heart, and Jesus still came through the seed, but there was a whole lot of, between the dashes of those moments, there was a whole lot that happened where David's seed was not looking well upon him.
Yeah.
They went away from God.
Yep. Anybody else? Very good comments. Oh, and I can't resist, because as I was reading over some of these chapters again yesterday, it's impossible for me, at least, not to see a comparison like you're pointing out. Not to see it. But then we're told whom to pray for. When Paul wrote to the early Christians and said, pray for those who rule, was it always a friendly handshaking, back patting, here I'm going to make you feel better type ruler they had? No. But they were instructed, pray for them. And so are we. So I try to keep two of those topics out of the discussions here. We must necessarily speak religion, but the other two I try to shy away from, but I've kind of concluded that praying for the rulers, at least for me, is praying that they have wisdom, that they listen to good counsel, and that they do what is right for the folks over whom they have governance. That's as political as I intend to get. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think the distinct difference, though, is that even though we see these similarities,
Right.
that there's never been a time of persecution, I do not believe, that would equal what happened under Rome.
Right. Agree. All right. Anything else to be said about this harlot? What happened to her? Did she keeping on, or? Okay. Destroyed. Important. What's it another figurative statement of? God's victory over, if, very clear in that text that Rome is the harlot being discussed. She's on 7 hills, all this other. These are things that clearly establish the harlot represented Rome. Now, we've had discussions in here about was the book written in code and so on. I can see arguments both ways. But there's certainly a good one here for, just like the statement, Babylon is fallen. So here we have a depiction using a woman of ill repute to represent that empire. And her downfall is Rome's downfall. So if you're one of those first century Christians being persecuted and you're reading first about the seals being opened and the various things that happened, and then about the trumpets sounding, I could probably go back a slide, and if you can read it, perhaps we can see it. Yep, sure. Good luck reading it. But especially down toward the bottom, earthquake, earthquake, earthquake. So many things that just continued to be emphasized in those cyclical revealings that were being made. I'll send this out this afternoon. I'll send this whole set of slides out. But would you not get comfort? I said a couple of weeks ago, if all you got to read was the first 11 chapters, would you have a message of comfort for those first Christians? You wouldn't? You wouldn't. What were the first 11 chapters about? I know you know it because you said it before. The events, right. This is being laid out for you. This is what's going to happen that you on earth can see. Chapters 12 through 22, we're getting the pictures from heaven. We're getting into the battle between God and Satan. So, if I really believe if you get the first 11 chapters, you should be able to see, okay, God's going to fix this. But on the those last 11 chapters, you see that this is between God and Satan. Yes, it's affecting the whole world because of Rome's influence, Satan's influence to Rome, Rome's influence to everything. So, was that the second, or is it about a minute away? 1 minute. Okay. We'll probably touch on some of this next week, but I want to cover a lot of ground next week because the last 2 weeks, the 2 weeks following, I do want us to discuss premillennialism some, because especially chapter 20 in this book is the place that a lot of the premillennial doctrine is focused. There are just a few words in there, and this doctrine is out there that we really need to be able to identify and deal with. So I appreciate your participation this morning. We'll do it again.